Hi, everyone. I'm Alexa. I would like to thank my advisor, Professor Marciano Goroff, as well as my partner, Audrey Lindsay, who's currently studying in Spain. And this is my business plan on improving enteral feeding pumps for the modern user. So when figuring out my motivations for this project, a patient that I interviewed actually summed it up really well. A patient's medical device should fit their lifestyle, not the other way around. And that truly is the inspiration for why I'm doing what I'm doing. But what is enteral feeding? So enteral feeding is basically a fancy word for tube feeding, which is when patients who, for whatever reason, cannot get enough intake PO by mouth, they get a feeding tube, and that feeding tube delivers some portion of their nutrition, hydration, and medications. And there are many different types of feeding tubes. They fall into two main categories. One of them is feeding tubes that go up through the nose and down into the GI tract. It's not fun, I promise. And the other one is a feeding tube surgically implanted into the stomach. And then depending on the condition and the constellation of symptoms will really depend whether or not the tube will stop in your stomach or if it's gonna stop lower down in your intestines. And when patients are given a feeding tube, they end up going home most times with an enteral feeding pump, which is essentially just a device that pushes the formula, medication, or fluids into you at the rate that you program it at. And so you have the feed bag, as well as the formula inside there, the actual pump itself, the charger, and then the IV pole. And there's another one on the market that has a feed and flush feature where it will regularly give you flushes for people who are needing extra hydration. There are two main competitors on the market, and they truly dominate it. So the first one that I showed you was the Infinity Moog. That's the one I have. It's sitting right there. It's the teal one. And then the other one is called the Kangaroo Joey, and it's also sitting right there, connected to the little dragon. That one is significantly bigger than the Joey, the Kangaroo, the Infinity, as you can see there. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into play. It's oftentimes just luck of the draw which hospital you go to and what your doctor orders in terms of pumps. But both of these pumps have pretty major problems. They're stuck in the past, they're archaic. I don't think they've had many updates, if any at all. And so I took it upon myself to interview a bunch of different people. They may be tube fed, they may have a child who's tube fed, they may know someone who's tube fed or care for someone who's tube fed. And I asked them what they disliked about their pump, what made their lives harder in terms of the pump. And as much as all these things that I'm going to list to you, I've experienced every single one over the past 2-ish years of being tube fed. I'm obviously not the only tubie, so I wanted to make sure that I had a well-rounded understanding of what other people were wanting as well. And it ended up being a lot of what I would want. Of note, the weight of the device was really important for parents with younger children. I remember I was at my hospital for an appointment, and I was there and I was chatting with a mom in the elevator because I was holding my pump, and she was like, "Oh, that's so cool, you can hold your pump, my son can't yet." And I was like, "Oh, that sucks, why?" And she was like, "Oh, well, it's too heavy for him." And so I was telling her a little bit about my project, and she's like, "That'd be so cool, so much freedom." Among my age group, people really want to be able to change the volume of the alarms. Because when you're trying to wake up to it, that's fine. But if it goes off in the middle of a quiet classroom, it's really embarrassing. And then what is most popular among the moms of people with feeding tubes who tend to be older or in college is a unique charging port. Because unfortunately, my mom has fallen victim to the 2-hour round trip to bring me my charger when my pump dies so that I can actually eat that night. So yeah, I'm sure she'll be most thrilled about that. But they also shared what features they wish they had. And I was like, in your wildest imagination, what would you want? And the 3 most popular were a touchscreen or it being programmable from the iPhone, the USB-C charging port so it can become universal, and then customizable alarm settings being both volume and type of alarm. And so taking all of that data into account, our proposed model is to create a feeding pump that is lightweight, small, has all the features of the 2 pumps combined, and it is also remote controlled entirely from the phone. That way the device weight that would go towards a touchscreen is actually something most people already carry, and it can make the actual device a lot lighter. And a lot of people question sending it with young children. If you look at a lot of kids with type 1 diabetes, they often have some sort of old iPhone in order to use their technology the way that they can so their parents can follow. So it's not out of the realm of normal to have a small child carrying a phone for that reason. But we're going to add the feed and flush from the bulkier pump, and we're also going to have a stronger motor for some thicker formula. And then all of these above, specifically with the alarms, are now able to be sent to the smartphone and smartwatch. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more discreet in classroom. Yeah. So the next step was to try to figure out how we were going to get this to the patient, and we looked at 3 different ways, and I want to talk about them. So the first one would be direct to consumer, which is exactly what it sounds like. I would open up a website and we would sell directly to the consumer. The problem I had with this is the patients first have to be interested and then they have to be capable of purchasing the pump in full. And a lot of people are dealing with being on disability or maybe not being able to work as much as they should, or even parents are dealing with a lot of medical expenses. So I felt that in order to get it to a spot where patients would actually be able to pay, we would be cutting out features that I think are really necessary and helpful. So I didn't love that idea. Then I looked at a HSA, which is a health savings account, which is basically just money you set aside pre-tax for approved medical expenses. But again, I really ran into the same problem where patients are still going to be paying for a brunt of this pump, and that didn't seem fair, and I felt that there was a better way to do it. So what we plan to go with is the insurance DME pipeline. Basically, we'll manufacture it. We're going to send it to a durable medical equipment company, which are the companies that will then buy the pumps from us to give to patients. When a patient comes to them with a prescription, the DME company will send it to the insurance company, and the insurance company will determine how much they're going to cover. It can be from 0 to full. It really depends on the insurance and the symptoms and conditions. And then from there, the DME company will go back to the individual and tell them how much insurance is willing to cover, and they are responsible for the rest. In terms of FDA approval process, obviously there's lengthy FDA approvals and when it comes to medical devices in general, but there are definitely some considerations when it comes to making a medical device that is controlled externally with a smartphone, because you're relying on two different types of technology and both can fail. But we have figured out that ours would be under alternate controller-enabled infusion pump. It's going to be Class 2 special controls, which basically just means it's designed to communicate with external devices. And then we have all of the important extensive testing and like clinical trials, making sure it's reliable and it's able to be relied on as the patients go out through their lives. And we actually, while we were doing this research, came across the Tandem Mobi, which just released, which is an insulin pump that is fully automated by the phone. And for those of you who don't know insulin, there's a lot smaller of a margin of error, and it can be lethal if you give too much or too little. So we got a lot of confidence in the fact that if they can do it, so can we. On the horizon. So one of the big things we want to do is we really want to break through this market. Obviously, there are two very big brand names, and in order to do that, we need to come through with something special. And so we want to make the app fully integrated. We want to be able to have symptoms. Parents could potentially like follow their kids' feed rates while they're at school. We want to be able to export the feed logs to doctors within like logging the symptoms so that they have more data for the patients. And so we really want to add another founder who's going to be working on app interface and system design to make it that way patients want to stay with us, and they also maybe in the future will want to switch to us from one of the other pumps. And then I want to interview doctors, yes, but really I want to interview nurses, bedside nurses, the ones who are interacting with these feeding pumps all the time, because I want to make sure that the features that we're adding aren't going to make their life harder. And I want to see if there are other features that maybe we as patients aren't thinking about that I could add that would help the nurses, but also the patients as well. And then early patent drafting. Patent drafting is really technical. I did some after my freshman year, actually, for one of the new insulin pumps that just got announced, which is kind of cool. But it is very technical, and we're obviously going to consult a patent attorney. But just making sure that as we're prototyping and looking at all of these things, that it eventually will fall in line with the FDA requirements we're going to need to meet to get it approved. And like I said, all of these, there's so many different people who can benefit most. And while I started with a project specifically for me selfishly, I really found out there's so many different people who are going to be able to benefit from this pump. And honestly, there are so many obstacles, so many barriers when someone with a feeding tube is trying to navigate the world that's simply not built for them. Their medical device should not be one of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this. Oh, I don't think this is... Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. This is a really fantastic project, and I'm going to ask you a question that I've asked a lot of people today.
Yeah.
Which is, since this is something that's so like near and dear and personal to you, how did you navigate the emotions behind this and basically just like your personal relationships with the topic while it is simultaneously an academic project?
Yeah. I think part of it was that I know that this is going to be able to benefit so many people. I think also selfishly working on something that is eventually going to make my life easier was worth it in dealing with the mental load. And that interaction I had with a woman at the hospital, honestly, like that changed the game for me because I was like, this is something that people will actually want. And like, obviously I did a lot of research, but to have someone in person give that positive feedback, I think that was really helpful. In terms of the health stuff, I think there's a lot of stuff I can't control. There have been a lot of things that have changed. Obviously, I can't control having a feeding tube. I'm going to have it for the foreseeable future. This is something I can control. This is something I can do. This is something that I can help other people improve their lives. And so I think that was the biggest thing. Like, yeah, I'm taking back a little bit of control where I can.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. I was wondering, one of the most popular grievances that you mentioned briefly was the kinked cords.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there were any considerations that you took into account to improve upon that.
Yeah, so in the motor design, which you'll have to forgive me, I'm not an engineer, but in the motors design, my partner is going to create an extra loop. So the tubing will be a little bit shorter, but there's also going to be less chance of kinking within the actual pump itself. Because obviously a circle, yeah. And then in terms of the feed bag, we're hoping to make it a thicker plastic, because the thicker it is, the less likely it's gonna fold in onto itself. Yeah.
Hi, wonderful presentation. So you mentioned, as an aside, the margin of error on insulin pumps and how that can be very lethal.
Yes.
For the pumps in general, right?
Yeah.
Sure, underfeeding is going to be just less nutrients, but when it comes to overfeeding, like what are some of the issues or problems that can arise?
Yeah, so I mean, if you give a body more calories than it can use, you're gonna gain weight. If you run it at a faster rate than the patient's comfortable with, they could start presenting with GI symptoms. So it could be really uncomfortable for the patient. Unless you're overfeeding them thousands of calories every day, it would take a long time for that to become lethal or dangerous to the person. And obviously we will have a very strict margin of error, it's just not as strict as insulin.
Hi, I love your presentation. You're awesome. I just wanted to give you a little opportunity to talk a little bit more about the display you have here.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, I don't know if I can move. Am I allowed to move? So basically, I decided for my funding to buy toys and stuffed animals. Thank you, Rick. No, but seriously, so these are models of the two major pumps on the market just because I wanted you guys to be able to see the size difference. Like, this one is so heavy, and even though it has more features, a lot of people will opt for this one, even if it means they're not getting as hydrated as they should have. Simply because I don't want to carry that around classes. That one's heavy enough. And so I really thought like this was the best way to do it. Yeah, the actual pumps, if I were to buy them outright, were like $700, so this was much cheaper. You're welcome.
Okay, all right, thank you, Alexa.
Thank you.